All right, enough of me playing over that same thing again. So what are you doing today? Thanks so much, as always, for being here. I really appreciate it. Thanks to BB for being for taking care of everything. As always, last minute. I'm always so last minute with how I go online. But thanks so much. Happy to be here. Happy holidays to everyone, and hope you're doing well. And first of all, big, huge shout out, thank you to everyone who has picked up the Triad course so far. We did the sale this weekend, and shocking number of people picked up the course. So I want to say thank you so much to everybody who did that. It means a great deal to me. So thanks. Means a lot. So you can get it, of course, using the link here for 30% off if you'd like to pick that course up. That's how you can get your C, F, and G major triad versions across the fingerboard. Super important stuff. Of course, I'm going to have, after that, I'm going to have a minor course coming up and how to solo with them and how to do more rhythm guitar stuff and all those sorts of things. So I think, I know that scales are important and all those things, but triads were the real deal. Once you get those together, it changes kind of everything, really. So there you go. Also, the intro track, I just give that away, guys. It's over. If you hit the YouTube freebies link, you can get that track right there. It's under the guitar effects order that I spelled wrong. O-D-E-R, odor. Nice. Just noticed that now. Awesome. You know, it's when you do all these things together at once. This is what happens. All right, that's pretty funny. All right. As the other day, I had a typo on my YouTube thing, and Tim Pierce texted me. He's like, you got a typo, quick. And I'm like, oh, it's a one-man show over here, except for BV, who's helping out. Okay. Thanks, everyone. So, yeah, you can get that track. That's from the Bitter End about a year ago, the Bitter End Blues. And there you go. All right. Triad course is great. Thanks so much. Okay, so today we're talking about order of effects. And I'm going to use my fractal today because I can bring it on screen and we can see how the order of the effects go. That's much easier than me sitting here trying to go, back and forth, plugging in and unplugging tons of pedals. Okay, so that would be ridiculous. So anybody's going, oh, well, the fractals sound different. The fractal is an amazing piece of gear. I absolutely am totally sold on these things. Will they replace amplifiers? In certain gigs, yes. In certain gigs, absolutely not. But for today, it's the way that we're going to check this stuff out because it's really cool because we can start to move these things around. And I'll stop talking about it and show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so let me get up. All right, what is this? What's going on here? Oh my gosh, what's going on? This looks really confusing. It's not really. So here's our amp block. So basically, here's my input, there's my guitar, here's my amplifier, and there's my cabinet, and there's my output. So here's where I can put effects anywhere I want. So just look at it this way in your head, if you can imagine if an effect that will go before your amplifier or after your amplifier, or if you have an effects loop, we'll talk about that, or if you're running everything in front of your amplifier, a clean amplifier, and using pedals like I do at my pedal board, we can imagine that the amplifier is sort of like an overdrive pedal. Okay? So we'll get to questions on this, but I think that hopefully is kind of straightforward. But it looks a little daunting, but not so much. Because there's a guitar sound we have right now. Just a super old dry guitar sound. I've got no reverb on. So let's talk about reverb first. Reverb, it's one of my favorite effects. Like I don't like playing without reverb. How's that? Reverb, especially at home, but if I'm on a big stage, sometimes you don't need the reverb if the room is there, but for most of us, we're playing at home. Reverb adds a lot of fun because if not, everything gets really dry. So reverb is an ambient effect or a time-based effect. So usually we want to put those at the end of our chain. So say if we imagine if we're in an amplifier, the reverb becomes between your power amp, comes after your preamp. So if we're recording if we have a pedal board, let's say we're talking about right here, our amp, this thing right here is our amplifier, that is going to be where overdrive comes. So I'm going to put reverb at the end of our chain. So I'm going to throw in some reverb. And let's do that. Okay, I like this London plate here. You guys can follow along with me there. Okay, so there's my reverb at the end. So I have a basic kind of chunky guitar tone. Rock and roll guitar tone. So there's my reverb at the end. So let's hear what it sounds like if we were to put reverb before distortion. So you see everything got really like really reverby and kind of messy. Not necessarily bad, but if you're getting overdrive from your amplifier, what happens is, think about it this way. The signal going into your amplifier from your guitar is a strong signal. The overdriven guitar amp sound or the clean guitar amp is a strong signal. Reverb trails and delay, as we'll find out in a little bit, are weak signals. So if we're trying to push overdrive with reverb, we get this kind of mushy thing. So if I turn up the gain, check it out. So it gets that really kind of washy thing. Now if I move it to the other side where it would fall in an amplifier, see? It's a much cleaner sound. So you have to think about this, that the reverb, you don't want to put reverb into overdrive. You want to add reverb to overdrive, if that makes sense, right? So that's really important about where the time-based effects can go. Now these are all choices that we can make, and it can really change upon what you want to do. So it's not necessarily, usually not cut and dry. If you want a specific sound, if you want like an old kind of surfy tank reverb, sometimes that's going to go ahead, it's going to go before the amplifier. But we're going to go for this is what I do, I think what most musicians do. So I'm going to put that at the end. Okay, so that's our reverb. That's a bit wet, I know, so let's just kind of dial that down a little bit. Okay, so there's some nice reverb on the amplifier. My amplifier I'm using is a JTM 45 model with a Marshall greenback cabinet, right? All right, so let's talk about the next one. Delay is a time-based effect. So one thing I'm going to think about is where I want to put my delay. So I'm going to put it right before my reverb over here. So let's just get a delay. The fractal is amazing. Look, here's all our delay choices. Well, let's go for a memory man, stereo mind guy. That's a little much. So as I said before, here we're having the signal go into the effect, right? Into the amplifier. Hold on one sec. All right. Just making sure it sounds good. Okay, nobody's saying anything. All right. We'll get to questions in a minute. So here I'm going to put the delay afterwards because the delay, think about the delay, copies your distorted sound, right? So if you want a cleaner delay, and I'll A-B them so you can hear them in a second. Van Halen and some people would have it in front of the amplifier at certain things, and we'll hear that, and that's a very specific sound. But afterwards, if you want to get these nice kind of long, big David Gilmour singing delays, you're going to hold his note, right? Right, where you have this nice delay that's like a pillow and it sounds cool and beautiful. That comes after your overdrive, okay? So if we have pedals or we have amplifier, we want to experiment with putting our delay after our overdrive. So hold on one sec. I'm going to show you something here. I'll run over, it's off screen. On my mini board, let me get my camera angle so you can see this. So I got to change my screen. So in this little mini board I kind of threw together with cables hanging out. Here's my overdrive. Right, I've got the matte pedal, the Supreme. I've got the Kingsley Minstrel, and that's running into my delay. So this is like my overdriven amplifier. This runs into a clean amplifier. This runs out through into my delay, and then my reverb is at the end. Because I like to have the reverb, I'm reverbing my delays as opposed to delaying my reverb. You can experiment with these two, but I usually put reverb the very last thing in the chain. I think that's where it sounds best and lives best. So this is how I would do it on my pedal board if I'm running into a clean amplifier. This pedal right here, my overdrives, act like my overdriven amp. We'll get more into that in a second. But does this make sense how this is going where the chain is? So time-based effects, meaning like reverb, to me ambient effects, because chorus is a time-based effect and all those things. But ambient effects sound best after any kind of overdrive. So if I'm running a clean pedal board, I'm running a pedal board into a clean amp, these come after my overdrives. And if I'm running it in an effects loop of an amplifier, which for all intents and purposes, the fractal is functioning as, we're putting all these effects before the power amp. So we could do this in between the cabinet and the amp, but what we're doing here is we would add it after our main signal so that the whole thing gets amplified. Does that make sense? Okay. See if there's any questions here. All right, nothing jumping out so far. I have a course on this subject, yes, as well. I have a course, TrueFire, an older one, called the Guitar Effects Survival Guide, which is cool. I highly recommend that as well, if you want to really kind of think about dialing stuff in. It's over at my, you can see in the links in my description. There's the stuff to the TrueFire courses as well. Okay, so I have my delay. So let's move that same delay sound before the amplifier. It's a little more distorted. Right? Okay, now I'm going to put it here. Check out the difference. Right? It gets all mushy and crazy. I was going to hit one note. So you hear that kind of that really messy sort of sound it gets, that mushy thing? That's because the signal of the delay is fairly weak and it's trying to push the overdrive of the amplifier. So you're distorting delays as opposed to adding delay to overdriven to a distorted signal. That makes sense? So for me, delays always go after my overdrive or an amplifier. So if you're getting distortion from your amp, I got a question right here. If you're getting distortion from your amp, and if you have an effects loop, that's when I would use the effects loop for my reverb or my delay. Now, in an old Marshall, there is no effects loop, so you have to be, that's tricky, and we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that right now. Okay, so any questions on that? Makes kind of sense, right? We're just going to put this right ahead, right? Combo amps. Okay, this will pertain to any amplifier. Okay, two ways I run my amplifiers. And honestly, as opposed to always lying to you like I do, in New York, my two rocks do have an effects loop, but very often I run the amplifiers clean and use pedals for overdrive. The reason why I do that is I don't have to run cables to the back of the amp for the effects loop, but it's mainly because the volumes that I have much more control of my pedals on the floor on volume wise. So I have to do a gig, I'm not sure what the volume is, maybe it's getting a little loud and the amp is not distorting as well as I'd like because it can't be that loud. If I have a clean amp running and I use my pedals for all the overdrive, then I've got everything covered. I don't have to worry about volume. I feel like at my feet, I can handle all of it nice and easily. Okay, so if I were to be using the effects loop like I've done with my two rocks, I would put the delay, there's reverb in the amps, but I would put the delay in the effects loop of the amplifier if I'm using the amp distortion. So the Bloomfield drive's got a beautiful distortion, kind of a crime not to use it sometimes. So I would put my delay in the effects loop there, and what I did was I ran a MIDI cable to the front of the stage and switched channels that way. You could do what someone like Matt Schofield does, because I like using different delays. He just sets his delay and forgets it. He takes his deep blue delay, puts it on top of the amplifier in the effects loop, and just leaves it on all the time the same way. You can hear my dogs. Okay. All right, so hopefully that answers that question. Okay, so the effects cannot go after your cab. So here's the problem that we encounter. If you have an old Marshall or something that is an amplifier with no effects loop and you want to add delay, you have to start to mess around with the delay output. So I'll show you what I'm talking about. So if I want to get a nice delay, I really have to bring down the mix, right? So I'm bringing down the mix to delay. So it's really low. So you still get some of the delay. So it's not pushing the front end of the amp as hard. So you don't get that kind of mushy sound. The only problem is if you want to get those really kind of beautiful, say like David Gilmour delays, the way he's doing it is he runs a big clean amp and he runs the delay after his fuzz and overdrive pedals. So the problem is if you're getting distortion from the amplifier and you don't have an effects loop, it's kind of a problem. Now what Eric Johnson does is he reamps everything through a PA, mixes it into a mixing thing, and then puts it back through a speaker. So he's got this whole other thing where he mixes in the delays. That's what Eddie used to do. They would run the heads into a mixer and then fade in, stuff that none of us can do on a gig because I'm moving my own amps, So to cure that problem, what I most often do is run into a clean amplifier, or I will use the effects loop. Okay, so for me, I always put in the delay after the amplifier or in an effects loop. I think it sounds best, or after an overdrive pedal. So I get that sort of sound. So now you see how, check this out, wait. So you can barely hear that delay because it's after the fact, but you put it in front, you can hear it, right? So it's very different the way it functions. So Van Halen would have a really quick delay in the front of the amplifier like this. Right? So it would have a really dark sounding delay. The other thing too is if I could change up the effect, the darker the delay. So if I have a darker delay going into a front of an amplifier, that also sounds better. So if let me see if I go to my delay here. If I turn down, I've got all these cool things you can do with a fractal. If you turn down, except on this particular one, I can re-EQ it, right? So if I took more highs off, for instance, like I could do this, which is always crazy about the fractal, right? Too much, but all the way, watch it out. See how bright that gets? But if I start to use a darker delay, like a tape delay or an analog delay sound, it works better with overdrive in front of an amplifier. If I go after the amplifier, see, now we can't hear it because I got to turn up the mix. Now that's way too dark for after an amp. There we go. Right? So let me see if there are any questions on the placement of the delay yet. So that's really tricky, guys. If the amp has reverb, I'm going to go through questions. What if your amp has reverb? I would, if your amp just has reverb and you have no effects loop, this is where the delay becomes tricky. So other friends of mine who you've seen on the show, like David Grissom, runs an amp with no effects loop, and he uses delay, and it's not so much a big deal because his playing doesn't use like the super long delays that I like to use for some of my tunes. So if I want to get that spacey ambient Pink Floyd thing that I love so much, it kind of has to be afterwards. So if you have reverb in your amp and no effects loop, then you got to kind of figure out how you want to do it. So now what I would normally do if I'm running a clean amp with reverb, like I do on many gigs with my 2-Rock, is I put the delay and the distortion in front of the amplifier, and I run the amplifier clean. So I can use the reverb, and I can get the delay after my overdrives. Okay, that kind of makes some questions. That seems to make, hopefully that will help a lot. So the effects after the cab, that's kind of tricky. Like I said, it's really, really rough to try to figure that out. Okay, so let's check out some other stuff then. All right. Here we go. All right, so now, kind of cool. Now, the time-based effects. Okay, like chorus and delay, chorus and univibe and flanger. This is up to you, and this is where they can sound different. So generally, this is kind of a little rule of thumb. You can experiment with either side of the amplifier. I love, I love an older guitar sound. So Hendrix, for instance, when he's using a univibe, which is a kind of a chorus sort of thing, that came before his amplifier that was somewhat distorting. So if I want to bring in a univibe, I will put that in beforehand, right? So I'm going to go to my choruses. I think you got the univibe here. Where is the univibe on this? Anyway, all right, I'll go. It's on something else. All right. But if we go to chorus, let's go to like a boss chorus kind of thing. Like to me, that's a very kind of like Van Halen-y, you know, because he was using an overdriven amplifier and pushing the chorus in the front end of that, at least early on. I really like that sound. I like those time-based effects to come before my overdriven amplifier. Or, don't forget your overdriven amplifier to me is my overdrive pedal too. So I'll show you that on my pedal board in a minute too. We'll see how that works. Okay, so now if I put it afterwards, or in the effects loop kind of sound, to me it's a lot more kind of pronounced. It feels a bit more 80s sounding, like, right? Okay. Make sense? Now if I put it in front of my overdrive or my amplifier, once again, that sound. See? Less affected by the EQ of your chorus, which sometimes can thin things out a little bit, comes after that. You put it up front, it has a very different sound to me. Right? Once again, afterwards. Not so subtle to my ear. So when I play with the chorus, I do like it before there. Right? Once again, afterwards. That sounds nice on a cleaner tone. I get a little bit more of that spread. So these are all decisions that you can make. But to my ear, that's my ear. Prior to the overdriven section of your amplifier. So that's where I'd put that. So if we look for something like, where's the univibe? Rotary? No, we'll talk about that in a minute. Where's the univibe on this? I forget. Phaser, that's right. Okay, so now for me, univibe for sure. And phase shifter for that Van Halen thing. But if we go to univibe, they have a great univibe in here. It's great. I mean, that's as good as any of my high-end univibes. Thanks, Michael. I always forget it's live. You get a little nervous. Okay. So to me, you know, that's that Hendrixy thing beforehand. You get that real kind of wah, 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 throbby thing out of the whole stuff, right? Okay, now, if I throw it afterwards, let's hear that. This is super nerdy, isn't it? Take it out. It loses the magic to me. It sounds good, but you're hearing much more of the effect, right? You're hearing more and that EQ that it brings in, right? And if I put it in front, once again, it's different, right? So for me, I do like those time-based effects to come beforehand. So if we try something different, let's try a phase shifter. Same thing. We're going to get the same kind of vibe. So if we go to this stripe, you know, and then after, right? You hear more of the effect. I'm really hearing that if I put it after before my overdrive. To me, that just sounds more like what my ear, more what I grew up listening to. That's the sound that I really like. Okay, so your tastes may vary. Sometimes people really love putting those time-based effects after your overdrive. So once again, if you're using distortion from your amplifier and you want that univibe or that chorus afterwards, you have to put it in your effects loop, okay? Or you have to put it after your overdrive pedal. If you want it beforehand, like I'm doing it right here, sounds like Van Halen, Hendrix, all those classic sounds to me. That kind of reminds me of Rush, you know, like By Torn to Snow Dog and all that kind of stuff, you know, that big neutron phase shifter that goes in front of your amplifier because there were no effects loop in the 70s. So there you go. All right, here we go. What would be next? Okay, now boost pedals. We always want to know about the boost pedals, right? Okay, so there's two ways that you could run a boost pedal. There's a number of ways. The first one, let's talk about before your overdriven amplifier. We want to get a little more overdrive, right? So let's go to a drive pedal, and let's go to something clon. We got a clon here, so it's a clon clone. Now here, now when I put a boost pedal in front of an overdriven amplifier, I am going to push the front end of the amplifier into more distortion. So if I turn down the gain all the way here, and the treble, the mix is up, so I have a pretty high level, but check it out. So that's like running your clon with the volume on noon and the treble on noon, but with no gain, so it's a clean boost. So that's pushing the front end of the amplifier to distort more. So the interesting thing is when you put a boost before overdrive and you hit it, you're going to get more volume and more overdrive because you're pushing the front end of your amplifier and causing it to distort, and you're doing basically what's called gain staging. All right, so you're pushing the front end. Oh, Simon Jarrett, what's up, man? Sounds like the chorus is stereo when you place the amp in the fractal. Probably is. Yeah, it's running in stereo. But yeah, I forgot that was running in stereo. Simon Jarrett, everyone. So, like I said, you can experiment where that goes. So now with the overdrive, when you're pushing a pedal, or if you're pushing an amplifier with a clean signal that's already breaking up, you're going to push the amplifier to the point where it's going to distort a little bit, right? So clean, well, not clean, a little overdrive in the amp. I might clean it up a little more. And then I hit the clean boost. If I want, I could add in a big gain to get more overdrive. Right? Depending more level. Right? So that is going to you're not going to get cleaner boost in volume. So here's the thing, for a clean boost, you would, if you're running a clean amplifier or in the effects loop of your amplifier, you can put a clean boost in there and that will boost the overall signal of your guitar. So you have to be careful though if you're running into a tube amp that you have enough headroom. What I mean by headroom is before the amplifier starts to break up and distort. So you really want to put that. You have to be careful. You got your cool pedal board running into your clean amp, and then you step on a clean boost, and everything starts to sound a bit weird and over distorted because you might be running out of headroom on your amplifier. So basically, if I put this afterwards, let's hear that. Let's turn down the gain, make it clean. Check it out. That's way too much overdrive level for this. Hold on. So see, I can use it afterwards to boost the signal. Right? So my dogs are going crazy. The package is being delivered. Here. I'm live. You guys are ruining the live show. All right. So hopefully this isn't too boring. I know this is not as exciting as many other things can be, but it's really important. People ask me these questions all the time. Where do I put this pedal? Where do I put that pedal? All right, so the big one, and I can't so much do on here. Well, people ask, I can do it, where a fuzz goes. So let me pull up my pedal board. The fancy board, hold on. Change my camera angle here. All right, so here's the big mama. So there's a lot going on here, as you can see. But this is the fuzz. Actually, the first thing I have right here right now, because it doesn't have a buffer, is the Octavia. And then that goes into my fuzz. Oftentimes people put the fuzz first thing. You usually want to put the fuzz as close to the front as possible. I'm kind of going back and forth on these sometimes, because many pedals will have a buffer in them. And the buffer can really affect the way the sound of a fuzz works, or the way it at least cleans up. So you have to be really careful about it. The guys in that pedal show, we were talking about that a few weeks ago when I asked the definitive question of reverb, of where the Univibe goes pre or post fuzz and all that kind of stuff. You have to be careful with the fuzz, because if you like a good fuzz, and it's one of your main things, I usually put it first thing. I don't even put a wah before it. I put the fuzz first. You got to experiment with all this stuff, because it can be really cool or it can be really weird sounding. So you have to experiment with some of the positioning. But generally speaking, the fuzz is as close to or the first thing that I use in the pedal board, because if you put it behind something that's got a buffer in it, say like the Klon pedal, it'll act weird and it'll sound strange. It won't clean up. It doesn't all the cool things that you want a fuzz to do. All right, so since Simon's online still, hopefully here's my Harlot pedal, which I absolutely love. So let me just, I can do a video on this thing at some point, but basically this is running the same exact way that we discussed. This is running into a clean amplifier. So I run in, here's my Octavia. Usually that's pretty early in my fuzz. That goes out into my Univibe. My Univibe comes out into my Klon, which goes into my boost here. So I've got like a few different drive levels. And you may say, well, why? Because I got them all in the pedal, and sometimes certain gigs want certain sounds and certain pedals sound differently. It's a bit overkill, I know, but hey, I had the space, why not do it? So this is kind of my always on, is Simon's pedal, the Harlot. I love this thing. So I can choose to boost the Harlot with the boost side, or I can use the rear light speed for maybe a light overdrive. I can turn this off and use that. So I have overdrive flavors. The Klon is a great buffer, and I've always liked having a Klon on the board. A trick that the pedal show taught me, and I experimented with as well, is the fuzz before a Klon sounds great. If you run your fuzz into a Klon, it fine-tunes that to a bit more of a mid-range point, and it cuts through beautifully. So then my overdrives go into my volume pedal, old Mike Landau trick, and a lot of other guys. So the volume pedal, I can turn down the overall sound of my volume, then this comes out of here, and it goes into my time-based effects. So I can control the overall volume. My dogs are going nuts. They start feeding off each other, like one barks and the other one barks. Anyway, so I can control the overall volume of everything and then run them into my delay and tremolo. And there's no reverb in here. I have it in my amp. If I'm going to bring this on the road, I'd throw a reverb pedal on there and maybe lose one of these overdrives. so I could run it if I don't like the reverb on the amp. So I have a Hall of Fame for that. I would throw that in here somewhere. Or I might just throw the Hall of Fame and leave it on top of the amplifier, which I don't really change the reverb that much when I play. I change the delays a lot. We could talk about this. This is an absolutely spectacular, ridiculously good delay. Andy Timmons delay. Gave Andy a buzz about it, saying this is the coolest delay. Highly recommend it. Super great. Once you plugged in, you're like, yep, that's it. So, all right, so I have my boost at the end here. This is the cool Vertex boost. I have this at the end. It's a great buffer at the end, so it pushes my chain, and if I want to just boost the volume of my overall pedal board, I can use this. But I also have the volume pedal with plenty of headroom. And once again, why would I use the volume pedal here as opposed to the beginning or at the end? What I like about this is it's post-overdrive, pre-delay. So I can have a fully distorted guitar tone and then bring the volume down, and it won't affect the delays anyway. It won't clean up my guitar signal. And I can still clean up my guitar signal by using my volume knob. So I can get that cool, clean, edge of breakup guitar tone and then have the volume pedal afterwards. And I can just bring that volume up or down with my foot, or I can step on all the gain, have a super high gain metal guitar sound, and then control the overall volume of it from the floor. Does that make sense? So this is like, if I'm going to a gig and I don't know what's gonna happen, if I can bring this pedal board, I will. And I love having the volume pedal on there. Kind of a newer addition, took me a while to figure it out. And this new Layla is smaller. It's pricey, but it doesn't work on a string, and it works great. It works on a magnet, and it's really a cool pedal. All right, so my point is, I've reconstructed basically. If we go to my regular Jeff-McErlain patch here, hold on my fractal, and then I'll start answering some questions. Sorry, guys. All right, I'm going to go to the FM3. So I go to my regular preset here. Fractal's pretty amazing. It can be overwhelming, but once you get into it, it's pretty ridiculous. Okay, so here's my regular. This is what you hear me play every week. Univibe. Delay. Boost. If I want a little more boost, so that's sort of what I'm doing, and I have a tremolo. Let me get over here. And I usually put the tremolo after the overdrive. For it, I don't love that sound so much. In an amplifier, it's the power section that is actually the tremolo. And if Simon's here, he might want to correct me on any of that. But, you know, so that's, let's look at the questions here. So that's kind of what I'm thinking here, that you can start to think about really a lot of it is experimenting with what you think sounds best. But I would always say your time-based delay, like delay and reverb will come after overdrives. I prefer the sound of modulation effects, you know, flanger, reverb, flanger, chorus, univibe. I love the sound of them before overdriven sounds. That's a totally taste thing, you know, and you can experiment with that. And the reason why I did this here is, like I said, instead of plugging in and unplugging pedal boards and in and out, it would take forever. And it sounds pretty much virtually the same in terms of how they're going to affect the signal and the way that the fractal is set up. Okay, let me answer some questions. I know it was a big, long thing right there. All right, then you get into effects loops and passive effects loops, and maybe BV's starting to answer that one, so that would be great. Having buffering issues. Oh, like on YouTube maybe. Okay, let me go back to the top. So one question I had very early on before we went online, let me see what's going on here. Let's get to that first question. Might still be in the chat. This is from Marsh Tubes. Tuner wah, univibe, fuzz, univibe, overdrive, distortion, chorus, delay, looper. Is that right? Pretty close. I would always put the fuzz first, depending on what kind of fuzz you have. Like if you have especially a germanium fuzz, really messy, really problems with buffers. So I would put that first. And then everything else sounds good. I put the looper at the end. I might put the looper before reverb if you have a looper pedal, because then you're just repeating what's ahead. Do not put the looper prior to your effects, because then you're trying to, then you're copying, you're sending a signal into all of your effects as opposed to copying what you played earlier, if that makes sense. So if you look on my pedal board, on my virtual pedal board here, a lot to cover, isn't it? My looper's at the end. And the reason why it's at the end over here is because I'm copying everything that came before it. So if I wanted to have a cool, chorus and delayed reverb, like sound on my loop with delay and reverb, I can it copies that. And then I can take them all off, and then I don't have to have them on. So I think that makes sense. All right, so let's get some more questions. You cannot believe that Jeff uses a chorus pedal. On occasion, not a lot. I do like them. I mean, some I love Mike Landau, the way he uses one. If I use it, it's more of a quick thing, a bit more like a Leslie thing. So yeah, that's where I would use that. Okay. Going to the questions here. And if you have any questions, just shoot them at the bottom. Going through everything. Once again, thanks for picking up the Triad course. It is available for 30% off, and the link in the description, and also that BB put over there. And then the opening track. If you go to YouTube Freebies, you haven't already signed up, you can get all the background tracks from the YouTube videos that I've done, or the tab, and that latest tune, which is the Bitter End Blues. Okay. So right, David Swenson was a while ago. So run the time-based effects stuff in the effects loop. Yes, that's what I would use. Absolutely. Once again, Stan Samos asking, is this for a combo? Yeah, as long as you have an effects loop, that's the one way to do it. If I'm running everything in front of a clean amplifier, I will not use, if I have an amplifier that has no effects loop and I want to really get into using my overdrives and things, I will not use the amp distortion. Famous guys who do that, David Gilmour. He runs into that high watt. It's pretty much a clean amp. And he runs all of his overdrives are coming from his pedal board. So, is the Univibe before the dirt pedal? Is it SE Nesbitt? Yes, the Univibe before the dirt pedal. But as that pedal show quite clearly said, and I want to thank them as well, and I'm always running into a somewhat overdriven amp anyway. So it kind of works it out, like this weird way the distortion and the EQ works together. Trower did the Univibe before the dirt. I do the Univibe before the dirt. I put the fuzz before the Univibe because of the placement, as we discussed. But if you have overdrive at the end, it still sounds good. All right. Doesn't the Edge use two different delays? Yeah, he was using two different delays, and Andy Timmons has that preset, his own kind of Edge preset in a new Halo pedal, which I highly recommend. I love it. It kicked the El Capistan off my main board right now, and the El Capistan I've had on for like 10 years. That's the original one, which I love. All right. Let's see what we got there. All right, I'm running through here. All right, the effects loop seems to suck tone. Sometimes you have to put in a buffer in your effects loop, and BB's answered that question. It's annoying. Not everything is created equal. Not all effects loops are created equal. Okay, I can't get a good tone with my clone buffer on my board. Does anyone else experience this? I really like the buffer and the clone. I just do. I've gotten my ears used to it. Look, it doesn't have to be a clone. It can be any kind of clone. Like the Tumnus is great. I think there's a really nice sounding buffer in that. I'm just used to having a clone on my board for years, or some sort of clone. So my ear likes that sound when I want it, and I can use it clean, which isn't really taking advantage of the clone thing. But you can also turn up the gain and get into that mid-range sort of push, which is really nice. Do you need an old clone? Of course not. I sold my old clone for this. Don't regret it. Don't even think about it. Haven't even thought about it. This is way cooler. The Tumnus is awesome for $110. That's a KTR. There's tons of them. So, excuse me. I do like the buffer in it, and I think I do like that buffer placement on the board. Okay. Okay, David Dear Parker, what's going on, man? How you doing? Have you tried matching the sounds of your pedal board with the effects in your fractal and the helix? Yeah. I gotta say, I know I'm sounding like a fanboy of helix. Of fractal, I am. I was really against these things. Let's talk about the modeling world. You want to check out some great videos like guy John Nathan Cordy. He does some amazing stuff on talking about particularly the HX Stomp stuff. For certain gigs, I'm all about the fractal thing, and other gigs, I'm all about the real amp. Of course, if given the option, if I'm going to play guitar, I'm going to plug into a real amplifier, and I love them. But on a gig, certain ones, if it's a really low stage volume, you don't know what kind of room you're in, or if it's a really well-rehearsed band, like my friend Angus Clark, who's on here, my best buddy, he's on the road with the Trans-Siberian Orchestra, and that's all fractal. And lots of bands are fractal that you may or may not know. Most notably, Metallica, it uses fractals on stage. They sometimes might run an amp. A lot of heavier bands do it, but a lot of newer bands have done it. Because I have to say, the latest iteration for me of the fractal stuff, like the FM9 and the newest series, made a big leap from the Axe 8, which was really good, but the clean sounds were really not getting me. And then this new stuff that they came out with is really great. There's other companies making great stuff. I haven't tried the Quad Cortex. I hear that's really great. The effects in the fractal are great. Things like Univibes are really hard. The only thing I don't really love in the fractal world so far, and I think it might be, I haven't really spent a lot of time with it, to be fair, or in any of these worlds, is fuzzes. I just found the fuzzes to be the weird thing. But, in terms of reverbs, they're amazing. The delays are great. All those things, I'm very happy with the fractal. So much so, I think on the next tour that I go, it's like a year from now in the Czech Republic, the volume stuff was so annoying, and the room sizes were so different. And so I might just try doing fractal this time, because it's my own band, and it's with a keyboard player. He's going direct. So I'm going to give it a whirl. I'm going to bring a pedal board with me too and see what happens. When I would not use something like a fractal, like if I do a gig with Robin, who's on stage with a Dumble, I am not plugging in directly to a PA with a monitor on the floor. I'm bringing my loud amp and that kind of thing. If I'm ever playing with another guitar player who's playing through a real amp, I am not going to go direct, just because it's like bringing a gun to a knife fight. And that's not knocking fractal. That's talking about stage volume and what an amplifier sounds like. Final thing on these modelers, they're designed to sound like what the amplifier sounds like mic'd, right? So this is what this is a great. I'll turn that tremolo off, but I don't know, man. That's a good guitar sound. I mean, cleans up great. And for me, in these sort of things, I only really want 1 or 2 amps. I'm not looking to play 1 million amps. So I think you understand what I'm saying. So if I know what the gig is and I can work it out ahead of time, I like the fractal because the effects and the amps sound great, and I feel really comfortable. The Helix, a lower priced option. I have not had as much luck dialing that in. But to be fair, I have not spent nearly as much the same amount of time dialing in the Helix. But for the money, you can't beat it. And when you listen to the guy John Cordy do his videos, he always sounds great, and he's using the Helix all the time. So there you go. All right. That was long. Okay, compressors. I don't like compressors. I never use compressors. I find them very difficult. The only time I would use a compressor, I've not had a lot of luck with them. If I'm playing with a clean sound, I want to get a funk kind of guitar thing, I will put them prior to the amp, right? Compressors can work two different ways with an overdriven guitar sound. If you put it beforehand, it can work as a nice sustaining boosty thing. You could turn up the volume to get more output from the compressor, so you're gain staging, and you get more sustain. You can also put the compressor after your distortion, and that will kind of level out the signal and bring up your note as it fades out. So a compressor limiter, it pushes up the bottom, but also keeps the top note or volume from getting too high. If I'm playing slide guitar, for example, I'm going to name drop my friend Sonny Landreth. He uses a compressor all the time. I remember we were hanging out, and then we were looking at his pedal board, and he was playing. I'm like, "Oh, do you use a compressor?" He's like, oh, "Yeah." Like, if you're playing slide, that's a huge part, and especially someone like Lowell George was using compressor, and so it's a big part of Sonny's sound because you have a lot of subtleties with the slide, and sometimes the note doesn't ring out as much. The compressor is a big part of that sound. So if I'm playing a lot of slide, or I'm going to play slide on something, I will put a compressor before the overdrive. I wish I had a better answer for you on compressors. I don't end up using them that much. I find them to be finicky, or maybe most likely I just don't know how to use it properly. But whenever I do, I just end up taking it off really quickly, unless I'm playing a very clean guitar tone and I want to play some lead stuff that's going to sustain, and I go for that compressed sound. Perfect example for that for me is anytime Jeff Beck plays a clean guitar sound on some of these records. There's on Amused to Death by Roger Waters, there's the first thing, the Ballad of Bill Hubbard, which is some of Jeff Beck's finest guitar playing. That's a clean guitar tone, and it's a heavily compressed guitar tone, so it could do all his, So I have overdrive on, so that's kind of holding that thing, but the compressor will let those notes really sing and ring out longer. So hopefully that answers that question. What about using the fractal and the helix for effects only? That's a great idea. I've just never really not done that. Because I haven't needed to. Then you're getting, that gets too complicated for me. I'm kind of like, as much as a guy who's got some of this stuff and working on the fractal, I do like to keep it kind of simple. I would need some outside help with that to run like the effects loops to the fractal to that. It can be done, and it's all very cool. I've never really experimented with it because it's above my pay grade. So what is a fractal? It's a modeling device. It's like the pod or the helix. It's by a company called Fractal, and it's called the Axe Effects. I know it sounds like a commercial for that. Yes, I work with the company, but it's not a commercial for them. I just think it's a great product. The Line 6 stuff they're great products. It all depends on what your price point is and what you can afford. I pay for these. They're a very cool company. Everybody uses them because they can do everything. One of the problems is that they can be a bit overwhelming with options. That's all. So I kind of go with one amp that I really love, and I leave it at that, or 2 or 3 amps. But if we take a look just for a second, if what it offers. So let me just kind of pull this up. Hold on a sec. Okay. So, if I want to, here's my amp. If I want to choose another amp, these are all the amps that they have. Right? Yes. And so then when you can go into the amplifier and you have your effects, or your knobs, then you have ideal, so you can change everything. And I can change the preamp. I can change the power amp. And I can change, so it goes so crazy deep. The EQ curve, the input EQ, I've rolled off some low end, output EQ, so this can go really, really crazy, but you can just treat it like regular amplifiers like this. They do require some work. I have to say that Fractal has been great with their presets. You just start playing it and like, oh, that's a cool preset. That sounds great. It's not, sometimes I found with like, a Boss or something, they put all these presets that have tons of effects and you're like, when am I ever going to use that? So just if we just take a look at the fractal thing for just a sec, go into a preset. Let's say, let's go to, I don't know, Eric Johnson, Hell's Glockenspiel. So we know that was, like. Right? So, sounds pretty great. So, like I said, certain companies, a whole lot of. And you might go, well, that sounds a bit terrible. Well, listen to the record. It sounds terrible by itself, but in context, it sounds great. That's another thing. Sometimes you hit some of these presets, you're like, does that really sound like that? And you go into the record and you listen, you're like, yeah, no, that does. So, there's, like I said, there's Kemper, there's all sorts of companies, but this is the company I end up going with because I like their stuff. And actually I have a few friends and students who are really good at programming it, so I have kind of built-in tech support, which really helps. All right. Analog equals true sound. Yeah, look, man, in any situation, am I going to want to play through a real analog amplifier? Sure, absolutely. Let's just talk about reality, though. I live in New York City. Am I going to turn those things up? I can't get them to distort at any volume. I've got tinnitus or tinnitus, whatever way you want to call it, so I have to be pretty careful. So if I'm at home, 11 o'clock at night, I can play through this and have this great guitar sound with reverb, and it sounds really great. It is a different experience. Yes, different experience than playing through an amplifier. They're two different things with the same kind of end goal. If I'm going to record, I don't have a great room to record here in New York. I've got these amazing amplifiers. But if I'm using the aux, which I have over there, by, where is it? The other side and backwards there is the aux, which is a cabinet simulator. People are like, oh, well, how about the aux compared to the fractal? Well, that's fake too. It's a fake cabinet. So at some point, you're digitizing your signal. They do sound somewhat different, but I would say the way they've gotten so much lately, I'm a bit more of a fan than I ever was. But there's nothing like plugging into a real amp in the room. But that's not what this is supposed to be, right? So it's a tool. Tim Pierce talked about this in his video, and Tim and I have spoken about it. They're great tools, and it's just bringing the right tool for the gig and the most logical tool for you to use. For me teaching online and filming courses, fractals are very logical and very easy, as opposed to having a tube amp and miking it and all these things, or going through all these other iterations trying to make this thing work. Hey, Devin, it's funny, my friend Devin, who's online here, he was always talking about fractal and all that stuff, and I was like, never, I'm never going to use that, and here I am. So you were right, my friend, you were right. So, all right, okay, I'd love to see Robin's face fractal. Well, yeah, like I said, this is Joe Abernowski talking about like, would I go on a gig with Robin for it and with a fractal? No, it's not the right tool for the gig. It's not the right tool for the gig at all. If I am going to do a tour and the budget's pretty low and it's a well-rehearsed tour and I've got lots of effects and I know these songs are just the way the songs are supposed to be, they will love you if you just bring something like this, because you run through the monitor. Maybe if you got in-ears. Okay, so let's talk about that for a second. If you're doing a show, not talking about bar gigs, I'm talking about a show where you're all on in-ears. If any of you guys do praise and worship stuff, I did some of those gigs for a while. Your amplifier is not on stage with you. So in that world, and most world, that's really big because you're running on in-ears, so it's like a silent stage, or you just have a drummer behind all those plexiglass things, and you're using this, and you have it in your in-ears, and there's no stage volume. So at that point, if you have your big amp mic'd in a box, the expense of that, how much that costs to, that same thing, the cartage of that, What if it breaks down? This sounds the same way every night. All those things depends on what the experience is. If I'm playing on a live gig of an improvised gig with someone like Robin who's using a Dumble, or my friends playing through a real amp, I'm not going to use this. If I'm sitting in with Matt Schofield and he's got my amps, I'm not going to show up with this. I'm gonna use my Two Rocks because that's the proper tool for that gig. So that's the way I look at it. It's just a tool it's just another tool in the arsenal, and it's become very, very good. It's gotten to be really, really nice. Yeah, there are no rules as far as single chains personal preferences. Yeah, there are no rules. The only one that I would really say is a bit more of a rule for me is I would always put the reverb and delay after my overdrive. I just think it sounds really ugly ahead of time. So much so that it forces me at times either to use effects loops on amps or run the Two Rocks, which I love, is they have a big, loud, clean platform, and then you get a really great overdrives like the ones that I like to use. There are great ones out there, whatever works for you, the Kingsley pedals or the Vemram or Matt Supreme pedal is awesome. Any of these, you find a good overdrive and then you just dial it into a clean amp, and then I'm usually pretty happy with that. The louder your guitar amp is, everything sounds better. It just does, because you're pushing the tube amp. It just sounds better. One of the problems of practicing at home. All right. Reality does suck, yeah. Michael Burrell, have you tried modeling amps like the Fender Mustang and the Marshall Code? Some of those, and some of them, they've gotten really great. My brother I got him to get the Katana. It's great. I'd used the Katana on a bunch of gigs. I was doing this little kind of ridiculous society gig that paid well. I just bought a Katana because it weighed absolutely nothing, and I would just leave it at the gig and play it, and it sounded fine. So they've gotten better and better and better, and they've gotten to be really great. And the way stages have changed, very little stage volume anymore, which I'm torn about. My ears are not, and I wear earplugs on gigs all the time and things like that, and I have to be careful. But the effect of not being in front of an amplifier, there's a certain level that I want to be at. So I would use that as I would have a wedge coming at me, which is a different experience. In-ears are rough though, because in-ears, I hate playing with headphones on. So they're right in your head right there. So with the Fractal and many of these companies, you can dial in a bit of a room reverb to make it feel like it's a bit more live. All right. Matt Gibson was asking me a question. What's your Matt Gibson? What's up, Matt? How you doing, man? What is your to-go amp model in a Fractal? Most definitely their JTM 45. That's this one. It's as close as I've gotten to, kind of where I set my Two Rock, and I love JTM 45s. Now, one thing about these kind of modeling amps and things, it may be. Does that sound like a JTM 45? Maybe, probably, but I like it. So in other words, there'd be some amps in here I'm like, I would never use that in the real world, but in the Fractal or in the virtual world, that amp can sound really good. So you want to listen with your ears. Lots of great plugins. You have to crazy. There's a company called Eskier Scuffum Amps, and he makes great stuff. It's like $125, $150 for an awesome plugin. So you can plug into GarageBand. I mean, there's so many really nice sounding plugins these days that I think, and who else, like the Neural stuff. That's a bit more metal-y, so I've never really loved their stuff. It's a bit metal-y. One last thing I can go on is, where's Evil? Oh, I was filming some videos. Evil, I didn't want Evil on some of the videos. I was going to say, the change I feel like that's happened in modeling technology as of late is the slightly overdriven to clean sounds. I think they've always been pretty good at the super heavy bands. Like a lot of the metal bands are touring with these because it's cheaper and it sounds great. But for me, it was always this sort of edge of breakup and the feel of it that they didn't have quite right. And I think these latest versions of these things have really made a big leap forward, a big leap forward. And that's why I'm enjoying playing them so much. All right. A little off topic. Do you have, this is by Chris R. Do you have any idea how to fix a heavy Les Paul? Would a thick strap work? Oh, man, yeah. Yeah, that's the trick, is this as wide a strap as you can get. Now, you can try to get a wide one that's not heavy, because you want to add weight, right? Because, like, this is a very light guitar, but this strap is a little heavy, you know? So you want to think about that. So if you have a heavier Les Paul, the wider strap's going to be good. And I've seen some ads on Instagram, because, you know, they pitch it. It's like a thick neoprene strap, but a wider strap, a softer material is definitely going to help a heavy Les Paul quite a bit. A thinner strap, even on a lighter guitar after a while. So I do always go towards a wider strap. I just like them better. I never like those really thin Fender straps because it feels like you just cutting into my shoulder. So Amplitude is great. Yep. Scott Moorhead, do you need an audio interface with the fractal? No. It is its own audio interface. A little New York accent there. Interface. Any of those. So I just don't sound like a fractal commercial. Hold on one sec. Right, this is a great option. Their new update with the cabs, huge difference in the sound of this unit, where they put in new IRs, impulse responses, which are your fake cabinets. Big difference. So I do want to dig back into this because it's small, it's cool. Like I said, check out John Cordy's videos, and Keith over at 5 Watts, a big fan of this. We did some presets with this for the Clapton stuff. I think they sounded pretty good. And you have a USB out, then this becomes your interface. So the fractal is your interface as well. So you could run it into the computer through a USB, or you could just run it audio in. So, well, no, if you want it as an interface, you have to use the USB. So yeah, you can run it through this. For less money, this is great. Easier to use. And the cool thing about all these companies is they're just getting better and better, and they're releasing new software and things. And also you can buy presets. That's what I did. I got a whole bunch of Pink Floyd presets. And so I like the way they used them, or see how they set them up and then copied some of the ideas. So if you don't want to sit there and really work your way through it, Keith and 5 Watt in Our World and I did a Clapton presets for the HD, and it sounds really good, I think. I stand by what we did. I like them. I liked it. It was different than the fractal. Learning curve on all of this stuff, guys, like anything. There's always a big learning curve. Okay. All right. I'm looking at any more questions. I want to say thanks to everybody, of course, for being here. Where would you put a looper with an amp setup? I always use a looper. I'm usually going to run a clean amplifier with a looper and have my pedals ahead of it. So the clean amplifier, so just repeating everything my pedal board gives it. A looper and effects loop will work, but I don't use effects loops that much. They're just running more cables to the front of a stage and all that. This is a fishbowl. I'm preaching to the choir, but miking a little different for in-ears is important to learn to do. But honestly, I don't give the tone of my ears. I want them for the vocals. Yeah, right. Of course, there's when you're playing in in-ears, miking is different. You pull it away, you get a little more room sound. If you have that option, most of the times when I've been in those kind of gigs, it's just like, where's your line out? And you bring your fractal, and that's it. Tons of bands are using them live. Don't think they aren't. Tons and tons of bands are using this stuff because it's cheaper. Especially, it is the way post-COVID tours are very expensive. Everything's much more expensive right now. Missed dates. So to keep the touring expenses way down is a big consideration for any tour at the moment. So that's why you're going to see a lot more of this stuff, for better or for worse. And especially with big bands, they can do whatever they want. But medium bands, it is cheaper. I know Guthrie Govan's been using this on the road because it works, and they're not making a ton of money on the road playing their music, I'm assuming. Well, I know that because they just aren't. Nobody is. Anyway, okay. Great point, Michael Cope. The best thing about the fractal act stuff for me is the ability to audition all kinds of simulated amps and cabs and pedals before buying the real thing. That is an awesome point. Yeah. I got a 5150 over there because I really liked it in the fractal, and I got a good deal in one. And then I kept on going back to the fractal, though. But that is a good point. It's a really good point. And also you have all these things, especially if you're recording, lots of fun ways to experiment with the tones. You know, let me try this. And if you listen to those old Zeppelin records, there's all these weird guitar tones on there, all these different kind of guitar tones. And those are mixture of those sounds, like a small champ mixed with a Marshall or something. And that's all those things together that sounds really good. We can talk about that some other time. All right, so hopefully this wasn't too rambling. It's a lot of info to get out. But the main thing is experiment. Time-based effects, meaning ambient effects, reverb, delay, I always prefer after any kind of overdriven sound. If you want to boost your signal and just get louder, that boost will have to come after everything, because you're just boosting your overall signal. If you put a boost prior to your overdrive, you will just get more overdrive. You will compress more, and that's a cool sound. It's different than boosting the signal. So in a perfect world, I have both, one in the front, one in the back. In terms of choruses and flangers and phase shifters, that's up to you. I generally prefer them to come before my overdrives because I just prefer that sound. Comes after the overdrives, the effect seems a bit more pronounced to me. So that's something to think about as well. So I would definitely experiment with them. Fuzzes I usually put first, strictly because of the design of the way a fuzz works and why we would use fuzz to get these kind of cool cleaned up tones, especially if they're germanium. That will be the first thing in line, even before a tuner. I try to put nothing in front of the fuzz. And other than that, it's a lot of plugging in and going, no, yes, no, no, yes, no, yes, you know, and that's the hard part about it. So, all right, everyone, thanks so much once again. Thank you, BV, and for being here for all the year of helping me out. I think I maybe see you in a new year or maybe the one after Christmas before New Year every 2 weeks. But I want to say happy holidays to everyone. I want to express my deepest gratitude to everyone who comes here and has liked the channel, watches my videos, picked up the courses. It means the world to me that you guys stop by. And I love that we hang out here and a lot of the familiar names and have a bit of a club going on. And I appreciate it. I want to make sure you guys know how much I appreciate you all being here. It's great. So happy holidays to everyone. And don't forget if you know my triad course, it's available for 30% off. And then the intro track for today was there. All right, guys. Thanks so much. Thanks, BB. And happy holidays, everyone. And I'll see you the next time. See ya. Bye-bye.